So if I just go through my slides, we'll only be here for 15 minutes. So I'm sure that would be very exciting. But I want to do something that isn't talking at you about classroom civility. That would be, I think, pointless in a million different ways. I want to sort of go through some kind of case studies, but that we're going to generate ourselves. I think this is not where I want to sort of come and think about what some abstract conception of classroom civility is. So I want to start with a bunch of what really ends up being classroom management stuff. But I'm a political philosopher by training. So we will start, I mean, if this goes as I hope, we are going to end up somewhere fairly abstract. But I want, talking about, freedom of expression and things like this. But I want to start with the obvious things that we talk about with classroom civility. What I'm going to call the easy stuff. Now, I've sent you, so when I started doing this, I went on the internet, put in classroom civility on Google, and there's like a million things. I mean, it takes no time at all to get a whole bunch of people putting together a whole bunch of pamphlets for young teachers, for graduate students, different centers for teaching excellence and similar things all over the country, sort of basic advice on how to manage a classroom. So I read a bunch of these, a lot of them, and I picked the best one, I think, and passed it out. And it's actually quite good. It's very straightforward. It doesn't point to a lot of, it doesn't worry a lot about things like, for example, there was one that had a long extended section on why boys shouldn't wear baseball caps in class. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. I'm not sure that's our fundamental question. So I think this is actually a very good starting point to talk about classroom civility. But it's a starting point because the real question is, what do we mean by civility at all? So give me an example, a real one you've experienced. Actually, I'm gonna make everyone go around the table. So we'll start here. What's your name? Joe. Actually, I'm gonna give me an example. Have you taught already? Have you had the opportunity to teach yet?
Not here on this campus.
In civility, give me an example that you've run into, a real one. My students hate it when I do
I'm
this.
from Tennessee, and specifically the Bible Belt, so I believe they're probably sorry. Just saying religious differences because art. That's often I don't want to say uneasy issue, but often art expresses ideas about religion, and if you're trying to teach the art, you don't necessarily want to preach the message of the art.
Okay. So differences with that come out of religious differences, different ways of expression, religious beliefs in the classroom, and the complications that arises when you're teaching something like art in the humanities. This is not an uncommon problem.
I'm Diane. I haven't taught in this classroom, but I think sometimes students from different countries may face the problem that maybe different nations have some conflicts.
Mm-hmm. National conflicts, the way that can come and arise in different ways of thinking about in discussions, in class discussion. Go ahead.
I'm Christina Waltman. I guess my idea would be there was this experience in one of my classes when we were talking about race, and two students started arguing with each other, and one of them got into this puffy thing. I don't know how to explain it other than he was thrown around in his chair. And this was doctoral students, so it was quite shocking from
Questions of race very straightforwardly, right? Raise all sorts of questions.
I think not this happened, not but I would say
what I wanted to my right to express her opinion. My decision. What she says.
I'm Teresa Harrison, Community Service Programs Office in Campus Life Center. I think just the most common is just having students by doing their owners of things.
I'm Dottie Weigel, I'm a engagement, and I have a student this semester when we're having discussions. She always speaks up, which has been okay, except that she brings it back to herself. Like, it's always about her own experience. And so and it's really heavy. Like, she's had a lot of hardship. It's just like every time we talk about life subjects, she just takes it to a very heavy level. Heaviness of the class.
My name is Rosalia from the economics. I already principal microeconomics, but just the participation. Maybe other classmates, not focusing on my lecture, and sometimes they just doing.
My name is Travis. I'm in gender studies. I have not taught yet, but from undergraduate experience and whatnot in women's and gender studies, a lot of sexist comments get thrown in.
I just started teaching biology as a graduate student, and actually in the classroom I haven't had any bad experience, but they just stare at me and don't say a word. Anyway, and I would have, especially with more experienced divers or people who started later in their life diving. Yeah, and they would completely, like, I don't even say disrespect me, but take me not serious, and I would have to be like, look, if you I'm way older in Singapore, I have like 3 times as much diving as you. I've been doing this for a while. But still, it was...
I'm Erica. That's the problem is Alex, actually, where I look young, and so my authority is often challenged in the classroom. And it really bugs me when I get challenged about the subject that I'm teaching on. So, yeah, exactly. So I have ways of dealing with that. We'll talk about that later.
My name is Krishna Basar, and I haven't taught yet, but as a graduate student, I know in the class that you know that dominate the conversation and don't really give anyone else the chance to talk.
I'm Wilson Harvey. I'm a graduate student in math. I'm teaching recitation for Calculus 1 and Maple Lab. Of what is expected of them in the class. Like today, I had the rest of the attendance is required. Like you can penalize for attending, and you walk in right at the end. Can I sign the attendance? So, you weren't here today. Sorry. But I'm here. Different expectations. And so.
things that I have not encountered any bad things or something that I can be learned here. So I am just trying to see things like
Anybody in the back wants to jump in before we? Sure, I'm David Hancock. I teach Spanish 121, and so far haven't had any big issues. A lot of claiming ignorance, I didn't know I had to look at the syllabus. During my courses that I'm taking, though, which are mostly seminars, I find that I feel like I talk too much sometimes, but I also feel like others don't talk enough. They maybe are pretending that they're really humble, but I feel like that's not really the case. They maybe need to speak up.
Also teaching Spanish 1 to 2, and I'm fortunate because till now the student is very good with me. Speak Spanish because we are supposed to speak Spanish in the whole class, at least 90%. So someone do not like to speak Spanish. What I do is encourage them to use simple words to express themselves. I can't do anything that please stop or please use Spanish. They are beginning level learners, so sometimes I have the question how to encourage my students to speak as more as Spanish in the class.
So my worst experience happened, and it doesn't seem horrible, I think, but it was actually really unpleasant. Was when I first started out, I had the same problem. I was 21 years old when I taught my first class, and I had a beard, and I had a beard for a long time, precisely for reasons that Erica probably understands really well.
I can't grow one though. It's it comes in very light. I don't know.
And I had 3 students who consistently read the newspaper in fact class. Now that was when the newspaper was read in large paper. So it was even. 2 were reading the campus newspaper. 1 was reading the New York Times. I thought, well, at least I felt better about that. And it was actually a pretty obvious problem, right? But here's the question I want to just throw out first. I call these the easy stuff because there's no theoretical complication to any of this in one way. It's not easy in real life. Managing it is hard. But knowing what to do isn't difficult. So in the case, in many of the cases, in cases where reading the newspaper in class, in places where people are talking, you can stare. You can just. Why is staring? That's actually really nice step. What is it?
And he woke up and he's like, what's going on? And they kind of were the ones that made him feel kind of bad. I mean, I don't do anything.
Sure, that everybody else that and I woke up.
I will embarrass you, and the sleeping stuff, because I'm able to walk around my class, I just stand next to them, lecture
What? Yeah. But again, what are you doing with all this? I mean, this is, putting it on your syllabus. Eventually, there'll be a bullet point at some point. Just put it on your syllabus. But probably it was unnecessary to bullet it. I'm sure most of you have thought of this already. Jed. Yeah. Absolutely. The first thing you do is you make their action visible to them and to you. First, you let them know that you're aware of it. And that's why often looking at them and staring at them is enough. I mean, just letting them know. And this does two things. One is the obvious thing, but there's actually a positive thing here. Because when you're in class, all of us have been students, I take it, so I was not a model student. When you're behaving in this way, why? Yeah, you're uninterested, you want attention. I mean, it's not just a question, oh, I'm watching you, I know what's going on. I mean, this isn't Al Pacino. What it is also a recognition that they're there. This is actually important for the students, particularly if you're doing a big lecture class, right? And, they feel like they're kind of masked there. The notion that you're actually recognizing them as individuals has a positive element as well as the kind of, disciplinary element that you're watching them. Because it means that you're actually paying attention to the class, that you're thinking about your students, even if you're only thinking enough to say, put the damn paper down. And that makes a difference. Now, you can expand that, or you can say something to them, like put the damn paper down. Don't use damn, it's probably. And we'll actually get to a lot of complications about this. I mean, towards the end of this, I want to revisit something like this. And we need to talk about the way things like this also involve race, gender. It's not so easy. I can get away with put the damn paper down. Not everybody at this table could. And that's just the reality of the society in which we live. And it's something that you've got to manage as a teacher. I mean, you can't, you can think whatever you will about social justice walking in. You can take whatever position you think ought to be taken. But the reality is that you will be seen different by how young you look, by your gender, by your race, how you present yourself. There are a million variables here. Well, million's too many. There are multiple variables here that you have to be aware of when you're teaching and you're thinking about this kind of question about discipline, classroom management. So if you look behind me, we've talked about some of these things. Look, what is incivility? So we're going to talk about civility, but incivility is what we're really interested in, right? At least as first. It's a disruption. And a disruption is just something that gets in the way of students learning. I mean, if a student is sitting way back in the corner reading, something that isn't in class, let's say you've got someone doing their math homework, top left corner of the classroom, do you necessarily have to intervene?
I don't intervene unless it's interrupting.
Exactly. I mean, the part of it is thinking about incivility, about, and you might want to intervene on pedagogical grounds now, right? You don't think this student is getting what they need to from the class, and you as a professor, you might intervene on grounds that aren't connected to civility. But it's incivility here. The crucial thing to think about first is to what degree is it disrupting everyone else? Like I said, now there are other reasons to intervene that have nothing to do with civility. The student isn't learning enough and they're getting a bad grade, and you as their teacher need to say, hey, you might want to not be doing your math homework in here because you're getting a D. Right. Right. There's many ways you can, and you can slide. I mean, there are ways you can manage that. You had a question?
I was just saying, again, this is the first time I'm teaching a class, but I told them it's a lab. It's quite on. I told them, I don't want you to pick up your phone, but if you want to send a quick text, I don't care. And I don't straight out, but I really don't care as long as you don't disrupt anyone. But I'll see who's paying attention to it, and don't come to me like a week before the final and be like, I don't get it. Because then I will tell you, yeah, you're texting all the time.
And that also has to do with the second piece of classroom management. It's a little bit idiosyncratic, right? So further down, I'll rate, the question of etiquette versus civility comes up. And I want to talk a little about what the difference is. Because etiquette are things that interfere with your teaching. And that are, for example, the not eating in the classroom, right? Some people, it really bothers them. If you, and you as a professor, as a teacher, have all the right in the world to set certain fundamental rules of etiquette that make you comfortable in your own classroom. But that's etiquette. I mean, there's, you know, other people, me included, couldn't care less if the students eat. You know, as a matter of fact, I actually like to, I mean, I think that letting them bring coffee in and things that I tend to teach early in the morning sets a nice, and I want a conversational class, it sets a kind of nice sort of setting. It's more like, you know, you're sitting around drinking coffee, working together, certain collegiality. I mean, it's actually kind of a conscious idea on my part. But this is, the crucial thing is that it's non-disruptive. I mean, you know, and eating has that potential, right? Hat wearing, you know, whether you call each other by first name or by Mr. and Miss. There's lots of issues about what I would call etiquette that are in your hands and that you should be conscious about. You should be thinking actively about, all right, how does this work best for me as a teacher? You know, what is going to set the conditions for me to be most effective? You know, and that again plays into all sorts of different elements. Do not forget, and you know, this is, I got great advice from this. I began my life as a theater major until I discovered I had no actual talent. But the one thing I took from that is that teaching is very much a performance. And most of you have probably been told this before, but it really is a performance of a certain sort. It's a performance, but it isn't quite the same thing, because you're not acting like you're somebody else, but you are setting the stage for a certain kind of interaction that you want to happen. You want them to learn. So what makes, and part of them learning is your comfort as a teacher. And you want to sort of establish the fundamental ground rules for that. You know, so if you want to avoid disruption, what you want to avoid is people getting in each other's way of learning. This makes a big difference. Class size. All right, so let's start with the really obvious stuff. Class size. Why does it matter?
Just like you said, the conversational atmosphere with 200-300 students just isn't applicable.
No, it works well. It is applicable, but it's a different model. And you actually can have a discussion class, in quotation marks, in a really large classroom. I've done this all the time. You know, I'd go in the big room in Gambrell. Before I was at the Honors College, I taught intro philosophy, you know, at 200 students at a time in there. But you can do it. But, you know, you ever watch the old Donahue show? It's like that. I mean, then it involves, and then it really does involve a performance, or at least that's what I found. That's actually connected to the civility issue, because that's part of the way that you manage the distractions. Moving, I mean, it's once again about them being visible to you and you being visible to them. And that's not, you know, that's not so easy to master. That's a lot easier for a humanist to master. You know, it's a very, I mean, when I teach Introduction to Logic, which is much more like teaching a science class, where we're running through, you know, a content-heavy class, and they have to do proofs and derivations and things like that, and you've got to get, it's a little bit more difficult there, because there is just, you know, if you don't get day A in, then day B is lost. When I'm doing Introduction to Philosophy, if they don't really get the third meditation, I can circle back around to that. I mean, and that's the other thing to remember. Discipline matters here, not just class size, but the discipline you're teaching, or the element of your discipline that you're teaching, makes a difference to how class management works, which actually makes a difference to how you think what a disruption in your class is, right? So for in an Intro to Philosophy class, a very talkative student might well be a real bonus. That same student in, you know, Bio 101 might be a real problem that you need to manage. Does that make sense to everybody? But again, all this stuff is very non-theoretical. You know, minor disruptions, some of the stuff we've talked about, talking cell phones, reading newspaper, texting, et cetera, et cetera. The question is always what? Is it a disruption? The solution, you know, step one, make them aware that you're aware of it, right? That doesn't work, what's the next step? Yeah, talk to them, absolutely, conversation. And what do you want to avoid in this conversation? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, you want to avoid putting them on the defensive. So, you know, whether you do it in front of the class, whether you do it in private, I mean, you don't want to put them in a position that they feel like they're backed into a corner. So, and you know, there's no, you know, some people, it depends on your sense of humor, it depends on a million things how you manage this. You know, some people are very good at writing class, making some comment, that both is funny and diffuses the situation, and they can handle it in a public way. Other people don't want to do that. That's not their strength. They're better talking to the student privately, in person. There's not a specific way to do it. There's a goal, which is to make the student aware that they have a responsibility in that classroom. Don't put them on the defensive. If that doesn't work, then what? No, this is the part, this is actually the point where particularly young teachers are afraid to go. You are an authority. You have authority. Use it. You have power. You know?
Don't want to learn, don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
Not come to class. That they're disrupting class, and until they can behave themselves, you don't want them there.
And if you're going there, who do you need to want to talk to first, or simultaneously? Yeah, whoever you're. I mean, in different departments, different people. At that point, if your authority is being challenged to that degree, you need to both establish your authority, and you need to make sure that you have the support from whoever is supposed to give you that support. So at that point, it isn't just your problem anymore, particularly if you're a grad student.
I've done this before. Because I have
go ahead, and then I'll take Jed.
So I'll give you like one talking to, and then the second time I say to them, you can leave my class and do not come back until you and your advisor have sat together and reviewed this paragraph on the syllabus, and I get an email from your advisor saying that you're happy with it. Right? And I mean, it's like taking on like kindergartners, but they then have to go and embarrassingly sit with some faculty member and say, I was bad, please write me.
Jed, you were.
I was just going to share that I had a student actually say to me, you can't tell me what to do because I pay your salary.
We pay for the privilege of paying.
The answer is I can tell you what to do in this classroom.
I had that come to this seminar at that time and I did not handle it.
I mean, look, how often does this happen?
I've had it happen. A student do that, I shut down the class. I said, if you're going to disrupt everyone's learning environment, we'll take the time to do things. That was at UCF when I was a grad student. I was a doctoral student, and I was teaching at a university that I work in the clinic. And I was young. We're done for the day. We disrupted the entire environment.
I had it happen where I had a student who had to come in and speak with me in the chair. Again, it was as a graduate student. Was yours recent, Jed, or was it as a?
It was as an associate professor here.
There was a comment in the back.
Yeah, I seem to remember from orientation that it's the nonverbal, the chain of events that I follow if I need to address a discipline issue would be the first a nonverbal thing, like someone's texting, maybe without even saying anything. There are ways of letting them know to put it away, or staring them down. That's a nonverbal way of going about it. Because, and then if you speak to them after class and it's still a problem, I think I remember from orientation you can file a big report, I think it's called.
Nice transition. Thank you. I planted them. Now, look, what we're talking about, look, the unpleasant, easy stuff, if it keeps escalating, and now we're getting to the point where a student is unresponsive, then yeah, besides the fact that this shouldn't be happening, you know, if a student you're asking to be quiet, I mean, students know they're not supposed to talk in class or do their tag. I mean, this is not mysterious to them, and they're doing it. And if it keeps escalating, there's two issues that you now have to deal with. First, the immediate problem of disruption in the class. But second, this is a suggestion that there's something else going on here. I mean, students and people in general, when they're told, please don't, you know, talk in class, don't usually, you know, go over the deep end and refuse to admit they're doing anything wrong and then continuously. I mean, that's a suggestion that there's something of more significant concern that I, as a philosopher, am absolutely not trained to manage. The last thing you want is, you know, metaphysical advice. So you really, and at this point, this is where you have to not just, you know, get control of the situation with your department, but this is where the behavioral intervention team at the university is very helpful. And they have these beautiful folders. If you don't have one, get one, put it up. They have all the numbers you want, useful numbers, and you know what the emergency numbers are. They pass these out happily. The number is here, and this is insults. I mean, this is and obviously this gets to the point where, you know, where very serious things, which fortunately I've never had a fight in class or anything. My wife had two students brawl in class. That was, you know, an unusual event, right in, you know, the biology department, right, that first floor. So this is the next step. But again, from a theoretical point, in certain ways, look, may it never happen to you, but knowing what to do is not so difficult, right? You need the support of your department. So that means you need to be talking to whoever it's appropriate to talk to, and that depends a little bit of where you are professionally. I mean, in my situation is going to be very different than a graduate student's. You know, a professor who's been here, who's a full professor, has, you know, a different amount of leeway than a grad student who's just started teaching. So be smart about that, and talk to your advisor, talk to your chair, talk to your undergraduate director, whoever is appropriate in the department.
What do you do about sort of the delicate things? Like there have been students that have dressed really inappropriately, like maybe some of the women, and they're revealing clothing, and then you notice it's become a distraction, but if you're to confront it, it's just really awkward.
Things like that, I think, those are very much things you can discuss privately. I mean, I think...
Like you could say that thing to a student?
I couldn't.
I mean, I would start it with, like, probably don't realize, but this particular thing that you already have to know is very distracting to some of the other people in the class. You start with probably didn't realize that what he was saying, that give them an out, because they're not understanding.
And that really is the crucial thing, is to keep them, you know, don't put students on the defensive. Once they go on the defensive, then they're going to see the real, you know, let's back up. The dynamics between a student and a faculty member are an odd dynamic, because the dynamics between students and faculty are both oppositional and cooperative. And both elements exist, right? In a certain, you know, we told the young graduate students in my program as they were getting involved with it, that the advice we gave them, we were older graduate students, is never get involved in any faculty fights. Remember, fundamentally, they have something you want. And don't ever forget that relationship, that it's about us versus them. And the point there was not that it was really about us versus them. I'm still really close friends with several of my graduate faculty. You know, just went to one of their retirement parties, which makes me feel really old. But that there is this oppositional side to this relationship. When you have a bunch of 18, 19-year-old kids who, you know, can easily transfer, not to, you know, psychoanalyze this, but can easily transfer parental relationships to teaching relationships, it's really easy to fall into this problem of oppositional relationship with your students, and that's what you're trying to avoid. That you don't want them to see you as that kind of authority. Now sometimes, and you know, you only have control of half of that. The student has control of half of that, and that's all you. But you want to avoid that situation. So talk to them outside of class, and talk to them in this way that it's as non-accusative as possible. You know, begin with the assumption that they're doing something inappropriate, that they're begin with the assumption that they're unaware, or that they're, they have different norms, or all sorts of things. Does that make sense, everybody? Again, if it escalates, what to do is, in the worst case, 911. I mean, if people are actually fighting in class, if you feel legitimately threatened, then the campus police come into play. If it's not at that point, then the behavioral intervention team is the direction to go. Though there, you will still have to figure out a way to manage the specific situation that the students find themselves in. Now, be careful here, and I don't mean this to prevent you acting, but there is information that you can gather about your students. There are lots. I had one of the most difficult students I ever had. He was completely unintentionally difficult. I had a very good student, but he had significant case of Asperger's, and that's a really hard student to work with because they just don't have the same impulse control. I mean, just things come out. But he was very clear from the beginning that this was his situation. Now, managing that in the classroom, where you can't announce this to the other students in the class, is a little complicated. So you do have to be aware of special circumstances, and often the student will make you aware of that. And if the student doesn't make you aware of that, then you manage it as a regular situation. But if you find yourself in a situation where there's complications and you're having a conversation with a student, give them an opening to tell you about these kinds of possibilities. In the conversation, be aware that there might be things going on here that it would be helpful for you to know, and they haven't felt comfortable letting you know yet. Because we do have students with, we have bipolar students, we have students with Asperger's, we have students with all sorts of affect disorders, and those things, are something that often make it much easier for you to figure out what's going on. And if you understand what's going on, it's often much easier for you to manage it. Hopefully they have the good sense to come with the letters and things like that, and they give them to you, but often students don't. So that's something to keep in mind as you're dealing with all this. Again, in the handout, there's all sorts of really practical advice about all these kinds of things. Classroom management stuff, does that make sense? Now, what I mean by all this is easy is exactly that there's no great theoretical construct here. The point is to make it, set a situation in your classroom where there's no significant impediments to students' learning. There's nobody obstructing learning from anyone else. There we go. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if you're going to get to this as a picture here. I had an issue from my side towards the students, and I didn't. So I grew up in Europe. We talk very openly about that. We were talking about the evolution, and we were talking about it was like random, non-random mating. Is that coming up?
Yeah, keep going.
Oh. And at one point, I just looked at them like, do we mate randomly or not? And of course, some were like, yes, no, and I was like, well, you go to 5 points and you hook up with the first thing you see. And then after I said it, I realized, okay, maybe I shouldn't, because they are young. What do you do? Like, I was just like, I think they all, I told them right then, I was like, hey, sorry. So I said to anyone, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that, okay? And try to make a joke out of it and say, like, at least just remember it. But, yeah, what do you do with it? Like, how far can you go, or not go, or say, or not say? I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
I mean, the answer, I'm good. We can do this in early order. Look, the crucial answer is everybody is an adult in the room. And actually need to be explicit. The syllabus is the great saving document here. We don't use our syllabi well. And I don't either. I mean, because usually, when am I writing it? Yeah, right. Friday morning, it's Thursday night, damn it. I meant to do this so much earlier. Oh, do I have an old syllabus? And then, and I'm trying to get, in the syllabus, I'm trying to get the intellectual content worked out. And, I want to do this day, but if I teach Rawls now, then I don't know, but I want to do Robert Nozick first. Last time I taught this, it didn't work that well. So I'm thinking a lot about, when I'm actually, spending time working on the syllabus, I tend to think for me about the sort of the content of the class, the material I want to teach, the outcomes I want to achieve. And I often don't think of the other things the syllabus can do for me. But the syllabus can set expectations, and I think this is something Allison was, I've known Allison for a long time. This is something that Allison was pointed to a couple of times here. It makes you can use that document and that first if. How many of you have the first if class where you come in, they read through the syllabus, and you got really nothing else for them to do? Maybe you give a little short introductory lecture, but it's like, we haven't read anything yet, so. Take advantage, that first if class, take advantage to set expectations. Take advantage of that time, or if you don't have that time, make that time, and give them a syllabus that explains, not just, the obvious stuff, but, what you take appropriate etiquette in your classroom to be. What are the things that you want them to do that might well be slightly idiosyncratic to you? And you have to be careful. You have to be within reason. You can't say things like no earrings. It's like, huh? Or that's because I saw they're very nice, so I noticed them.
So could you say like, I don't want you to, don't even bring the cell phone to class?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
First day of class, everybody take out your cell phone and turn it off. Because I know they're going to have it in their bag.
Yeah, but
I'm like, take it off, put it on your desk, and then turn it off.
I've known I haven't done this, but I've known faculty members who bring a plastic box to class, set on the front desk, and each day say, put your cell phones in, and pick them up when you're done. Now, I think that's extreme. I wouldn't do that, and I'll tell you why I wouldn't do that, because I think it's likely to create exactly the atmosphere you don't want, the oppositional atmosphere. But asking them to take out their stuff, and what I do is because I'm as bad as they are, many of us, as I tell them, all of us used to be students. All the bad habits you have, we're just better at hiding. But, I'm still as bad a procrastinator as I was when I was an undergraduate, sad to say. I'm still writing papers on airplanes on the way to conferences. So, when you're doing this, I take my own cell phone out and say, all right, everybody out, turn them off, and because I'm going to forget too, so everybody shut. And I actually will tell students, all right, tomorrow it's your job to remind us to turn our cell phones off, because I'll forget. I'll come into class and I'll forget to do it. Tell the students, everybody, when class comes in, somebody, remind everybody to turn their cell phones off. Remind me to turn my cell phone off. Then it's not about them. It's about, a normal, things that we all do that we forget to turn our cell phones on. Let's shut them down. All right, don't mess with them. I've even had my wife call me on the first day of class. It's a bad trick, but it works. Like 20 minutes into class, have someone call you and have your cell phone go off in class, and then you can make a big joke about it. And then you can, don't be below manipulating them when it's for a good cause. And this is the performance part of it. This is very much the performance part of teaching.
I was just going to say that because of my bad experience with the two students when we were talking about race and racism, from then on, the first day of class, I use that time to have them talk about what they think makes a good discussion and good behavior in the classroom, and then they have to come up with ground rules, and then I post them on our website, and we revisit them throughout the semester in order to put the responsibility back on the student for their own behavior. And it seems to have worked.
I want to follow up on that because I want to push this distinction a little bit and then jump ahead. Tell me some things that you think are uncivil rather than breaches of etiquette. So what I'm suggesting is that the way I'm thinking, philosophers love distinctions. For me, etiquette are those things that are idiosyncratic to us as faculty, that each one, and within sort of a reasonable space might be very different about how we run our classrooms. For me, the stuff that's uncivil are the things that clearly are going to be disruptive in a classroom, that are not really that idiosyncratic anymore, but are, one obvious example is having people actually talk on their cell phones in class. That seems to be to cross a line from a breach of etiquette, where it's something your professor would rather not do because it gets in their way, to straight out incivility. That is something that is actively disruptive of class. Other people can't learn anymore. Give me some.
We watched a documentary last year, and then we had a
discussion, and there was a student that was clearly put out by his peers in the way that they thought, and so he just like made some noise and rolled his eyes. And so I felt like that was uncivil because, I mean, it's okay to disagree, but to present it in a very passive aggressive.
I'll come back to this. I actually think, believe it or not, the Carolina Creed, who when I first came here I thought was one of the corniest documents I've ever read. And you know, I've come over time to think it's a lot better. I've gotten a chance to talk to Dennis Pruitt, who wrote a lot of it often about it, and he's actually convinced me it's better, way better than I thought it was. So I want to defend this a little bit and tell you guys that there might be more use here, because my general sense is for most people most professors see this as I did originally, as a bit of a cornball document. I think there's more here, but before we do that, we're already jumped there. The attitude, the notion here is that, and this is something that isn't often stressed in the discussion. Now we're moving a little bit beyond what the sort of easy stuff is that one of the things that you want to emphasize in your classroom is civil listening. I mean, we tend to think of civility as an active responsibility. That is, I'm being civil if I'm not doing something, right? But actually what we really want our students to do is pay attention. That kind of, slumping, what it is fundamentally is the difference between disagreeing and delegitimizing. There's a distinction that we will use in political theory all the time, right? Your students are free and have to be free to disagree with almost anything, including things that you think are just borderline nutso, to use the technical term. But to delegitimize something is a very different thing. To say that, because to delegitimize something, say it's not worthy of entering into the discussion, as opposed to this is wrong, or I think there's like 9 reasons why you shouldn't believe this. That's a perfectly legitimate part of any academic discussion, and can be expressed and can get hot. And this is not about heat in the classroom. This is not about passion. This is not about volume. This is about the way that you treat certain claims. And what you were watching, the great, sometimes it's hard to give words to why is this bugging me so much? And it's because it's treating the discussion, the classroom, or the topic as not a legitimate part of whatever you're doing. And there is only one person in the room that's allowed to do that, and that's you. And this is part of, and this is again, for young teachers, this is actually a difficult thing to understand, that there is a gatekeeping function here, and that you really are making certain claims about what counts as a legitimate part of the discourse in the room and what doesn't. And you can be as broad, and that is a discomforting part of teaching sometimes.
How do you stop it? I mean, what if somebody comes up with an argument? I mean, I can't turn around and be like, that's bullshit.
No, because if it's an argument, it isn't. And you can say, look, there's all sorts of I have a stock speech that I give my students. I said, look, you got to understand there is such a thing as a stupid argument, and there is such a thing as but the important thing is to have the courage to make it. All of us do it. We all come up with things that we later go, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know where I came up with that. That was just lame. That was just a really dumb idea. You have to say them out loud, and you have to accept. And this actually goes back to both the civil listening and the question of how you enter a classroom and what you ask of your students. I want to talk a little bit about community and responsibility. And this is now where it gets more difficult. Students have to enter a classroom with the possibility of being wrong in their view. They have to be able to learn. But
that's the problem.
Sure.
That a lot of them have been so. First of all, getting them to that point where they are comfortable enough, confident enough to speak up. It's pulling teeth, and you spend a lot of time trying to get that there. But then, a lot of them have never been told no, or more politely, Can you explain to me how you come to that conclusion? Right. And so, you know, the fact that I have to stand in front of my class and say to them, in this class, we believe in evolution. You know,
It's in my syllabus when I teach it. It's a theory, it's not up for question in the classroom. If you have a problem with that, you might want to take it.
This is the answer. I mean, part of the more difficult stuff, and in a certain way, here's where, maybe people in chemistry and physics don't have this problem, though I don't believe physics certainly does. But there are ways in which you have to lay out the fundamental claims of the classroom of this course up front sometimes. I mean, this is just part of what the expectation is.
What I'm saying is that when you have to say to a student, I mean, you don't want to say to them that's bullshit, but you want to say to them that's bullshit.
How do I do that?
Right? And so because I had this experience yesterday, you know, or the day before, where, I mean, he said something, and I praised him for saying stuff because he was contributing to the class. But on that particular point in particular, I just wanted to say, did you not think before you opened your mouth? And so I don't think my response was as gentle as it could have been. Because I think he probably felt like I was picking on him. Right? And I'm sorry for that, but I'm also kind of like, you know, sometimes you just get picked on because you see that.
Do you think that has anything to do with gender? Because I feel like sometimes I am more afraid to say that's bullshit because I'm afraid of how they perceive me as a woman and as a young woman than if I was a man who is older. I feel like you could probably have a little bit more leeway to call them out. But I don't know, maybe that's just my own perspective.
Absolutely. Look, you know, this gender has race, class, gender, self-presentation, accent. All these things play a huge role in this. I mean, this is part of the performance element here. It's not just performance in the sense that so to perform well, you first have to understand your own role. You have to be able to see yourself as an audience member would, and that's actually one of the most difficult parts of teaching. Now this is indirectly connected to civility or not, because this is connected to understanding how you're going to be perceived in a class and how you can then manage that perception to limit the opportunities for incivility. And I think as a woman, you're going to face different kind of challenges. I get away with murder in a classroom. I mean, I'm older. I come in as an associate dean. I used to have a beard, and the beard's kind of white, so that's I look like kind of mean Santa Claus. I mean, and I completely will take advantage of that. So I can actually say that's bullshit to a student, never have a bit of problem with it. I can laugh, I can be sarcastic. A lot of the things says never be sarcastic. If I wasn't sarcastic, I wouldn't know how to teach.
That'd be a 5-minute class.
But yeah, but you also set that in the way that you present yourself, and there's no easy way to do. I mean, there's no 5-minute lecture where you can teach someone how to do that. This is something but this requires a very conscious sort of activity on your part about how you present yourself to your students, and how they're going to see you. And there's advantages and disadvantages. I mean, so let's say you're not an American, right? So we have people here who aren't American. It's going to be much more complicated because it's much like doing a performance to an audience in a different country. All of a sudden, your audience is different.
I get away with stuff, but I can always.
There are advantages as well.
Right? I've only had one negative reaction, and it's all over with my professor.
Yeah, but But look, think about how this is connected to this question of civility. Because I mean, in an ideal world, right, your students would be very open to all the differences that we present as faculty. In the real world, your students are the least open to all the differences we present as faculty. Because they're being brought into that culture. We exist, academic culture, in the end, for all the good and bad about it, is a relatively open culture. We exist in that culture, we're used to it. We are bringing students into this culture, and we teach at University of South Carolina, and that means that a lot of our students aren't ready for that. I mean, hopefully they're ready for that, but they need to be acculturated.
And they have to be reminded too, Ed, I think, and I tell my students at the beginning of the semester now, I said, you're here to learn. You have to have an open mind, right? They're here, yeah.
Well,
But, I mean, when you tell them that and you say, I'm going to challenge you this semester, I'm going to challenge the beliefs that your parents instilled, or that your church instilled, or that your culture instilled,
I'm going to challenge them. Anthropology and women and gender studies. So, I mean, they hear stuff out of my mouth that they have never heard before.
but look, the first thing is about this civil listening. Civil listening is what you're teaching them.
Yeah.
I mean, the notion that you are actually, I mean, they have never heard this before. They've never heard that they have to have a certain kind of attitude in the classroom. I mean, if you're lucky, they have, right? And this is the other thing that you have to avoid.
I was just going to say with the civil listening, I just want to give some students credit when I had this discussion with them and they came up with their ground rules.
Mm-hmm.
They brought listening into it and said you need to listen before you start thinking of your own response. So listen to their whole argument before you counter with it. And I thought that was good. Like another class had never said anything like that before. So I was somewhat proud of my students that they recognized that that is part of being civil.
Now remember, in the social sciences and the humanities, we have both an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is that we are more likely to walk into topics that create these problems. But we have a significant advantage, which is we can make it an explicit part of our class, and we're still teaching our class, right? If you're doing this in a chemistry class, you got to kind of stop teaching chemistry to get to this. Where if I'm in a philosophy class, I teach social and political philosophy. This is the first lecture, and we talk, in an anthropology class. I mean, so there is both those elements. If you're teaching in disciplines that are, that are driven by a certain amount of content, you have to almost create a separate space to talk about this. This is what the first day of class or something like that. I mean, but it's important you make this explicit. Even though if you're teaching intro chemistry, you're also less likely to run into the problem. But it's far from impossible. Don't think it's all that unlikely. So don't, count on the fact that you're teaching a subject that seems to be non-controversial, because as biologists have found out over the last 20 years, this doesn't work. Who knows when, the next time you're teaching a physics class, somebody tells you that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a mess you never expected. And you were just trying to get them to learn, some basic mechanics. So it can happen, and so be explicit about this, and avoid. And this is what you want to avoid yourself more than your students. Look, you see this. I have when I talk about civility in political life. I've written about this and given lectures on the broader political civility, and one of the great problems, and you saw it the other day, right? Over you just saw it in the news right now. Everyone is outraged about what everyone has said about everything, and it's like, oh, no one's really outraged. Stop it. You're just lying. Nothing was that outrageous. No one called anybody else's mother anything, or suggested that, well, yeah, see, that one might have not been so.
That was the outrage.
Yeah, that one. But I mean, the claims about who caused what in the Middle East, I mean, they're not outrageous. There's not reason to be angry, but there is this building notion of false outrage. The problem here is not with our students, it's with us. This is something you have to be really careful about. You need to hold on to perspective that students are rarely acting in a sense that their intention is to directly offend you. As a matter of fact, you're an animatronic animal. as far as they know, when they leave the room, you are frozen in place, and you start moving when they walk back in. I mean, you are that far out of their minds. So it is rarely about you. And so you want to be actually really careful about this. I mean, as much as you're invested in your students, and if teaching becomes a significant part of your the way you understand yourself, what you want to do professionally, you become very invested in your students. They're often not that invested in you. So be careful about how you take offense. And that's what I mean by false outrage. It can be very, very easy to blow these things way out of proportion. And that actually can create problems for you. Because it creates, I mean, I think this is a form of incivility. And this, the question of who's responsible for what here. In fact, you bear a lot of responsibility when you go into a classroom. Now, you bear a lot of responsibility, and you bear the responsibility to set the responsibilities for the classroom. And this is where being explicit, once again, your syllabus seems like a silly little document, makes a difference. With the Carolina Creed, makes a difference. The reason the Carolina Creed works is because I hate it because I am a philosopher who wants much more sophisticated language and much more sophisticated concepts than exist in that creed. The reason I've come to think it's much better than it is that the people who are reading are 18-year-olds who are not philosophers, are just trying to get a decent job, and would like to, make sure their biggest concern is that the football ticketing system work correctly, so they get tickets to the game. Now, they don't want to learn. I mean, it's not that, but this is not, the language of John Rawls and the language of social contract theory is not going to get me anywhere. Even the language of, the Declaration of Independence is not, they do not speak in 18th century English. And the creed is effective because it sets basic responsibilities. Don't be afraid to use it. Modify it. Say the same thing. But don't be afraid to make all that stuff explicit for them right up front. It is all you've got. I mean, in a certain way, this is the great disadvantage of teachers. All we have are words. We can throw words at them and get them to think about the words. And then after that, it's like, well, okay. But establish those responsibilities early. Use the syllabus, use the first day of class, remind them when you need to, and that will make a big difference. Let me skip that. And don't forget that civility has a backside. And this is where, I get more and more concerned. Calls for civility are often calls to limit freedom of expression. And this is where people saying outrageous things, racist things, sexist things, the question, I put this question up, I hope artfully, who asked it earlier about sexism in class, and, in fact, it is inevitable that you will hear some jaw-dropping things said in your classroom. I had a student explain to me how, and this was in a Malcolm X class, the political philosophy of Malcolm X. I had a white student explain to me how there was lots of studies that showed that African Americans had lower IQs than white people. He unfortunately read the bell curve. Besides the fact that I thought, oh, good God, he's going to get the crap beaten out of him after class. And I was having trouble feeling, all that badly about it. But in fact, this was very, very difficult because he made an argument. He had read this. It looked like a legitimate source to him. I mean, he was not trying to delegitimize someone else's argument. He's a 19-year-old. The bell curve looks like a real book. It has footnotes. It has in fact, it was a very substantial task for professional academics to go through and explain what was wrong. I mean, if you remember when that book came out, it wasn't just, oh, we all hate it. People took the time to go, no, look, the study's misused. I mean, and that's what you have to do when you get something like that, right? You go through step by step and demonstrate why it is just a profoundly misguided argument. So misguided that in the end you're suspicious of the motives. But that's, how do you get a student to that? I mean, this was not a simple question. And how do you get your class to think through the difference between what that kid said and a more direct form of racism? And how do you get that student to think about whether that really was a kind of racist comment? That's not his self-understanding at that point. We went through the bell curve. It was horrible. I mean, in brief, no, we went back through. It's easy to get. Fortunately for things like that, there was such public press. There's a really nice Atlantic article that laid out a lot of the fundamental problems, so we didn't have to read the whole thing. But we went back through and we backed up and went through the arguments, and then we used a little of Stephen Jay Gould's Mismeasure of Man and some other things like that, and we took a tangent in the class to go through and spend 2 days talking about the issue of racism and the measurement of intelligence. Because I saw no other way to, I mean, it seemed like you had to, at that point, to address the issue, which kind of put us off schedule for other things I wanted to do.
It's a teachable moment. That's how I use those moments as well. I don't say you're full of bull. I say, let's make this a teachable moment and talk this out. Why do you think that? And here's why maybe you should think.
But then did you have to, I mean, if he says this in the middle of class, then do you stop and try and address that at that time, or do you say, we'll come back to that tomorrow? Because it sounds like you have to go back and get.
In that case, I stopped it. We were able to discuss it at that time and then went back. I mean, look, there are some, I mean, fortunately, I had a smart room and it made a huge difference. Yeah, you Google it, and I mean, we were able to address it directly. There's no cut and fast way you're going to manage this. It depends a little bit on the resources you have available to you at that moment and what you can do and the nature of the example. So what I was able to do then was a function that I had a smart room and that I happened to be, to know this material reasonably well, as opposed to they could have raised something else which I didn't know as well, and I would have had to manage it in a different way.
But if you're ascribing to the Carolinian Creed and discouraging bigotry and all these other things, isn't that primary to helping the student understand? Like, isn't the fact that he, was discriminatory?
Right, but you've got to remember that student doesn't understand what he's saying is bigotry.
Yeah, but
you have to, and that becomes the question: is this an act of bigotry?
The difference was he wasn't directing it to any particular person.
Yeah, but other people received it, whether or not he directed it.
Right, but remember that.
But if he doesn't know that what he's saying
Hold on for a second.
is bigotry, then how?
You reminded.
Okay.
Then, I mean, if I say something and I'm not aware that it's sexist or racist or classist, then I don't think you can just say to him, you're being a bigot. You have to bring him to the understanding.
Well, and it's also for but here's the important thing for the other students. I mean, what you're also teaching. You're also the teachable moments for everybody, because it's also working through the other students and how to react with something besides anger. Right. I mean, it's not just for the student who says the outrageous thing, but it's also for the students who are outraged. But I mean, that outrage has to be founded in something, and you begin to give them the tools to make that outrage, give an explanation and give content to their outrage, so that they're able to much better express, all right, why is this such a terrible thing? What's so bad about the bell curve besides that it makes me, it says that I'm not smart, and that's just crazy. Because the bell curve actually doesn't say that. One of the ways they protect themselves is they make a population argument. So they grant that individual African Americans could be as smart as anybody. The single smartest person in the world could be an African American. It's a population argument. So how do you teach students who disagree with this? How do you give them the critical tools to say more than just, I hate that, that's crazy. So you use it in both ends. But again, this is where the delegitimizing versus, mean, this is the toughest call. This is the hardest part about thinking about civility in the classroom. But this is also the crucial part about, I mean, generally speaking, we err on the side of letting crazy stuff in.
Well, but in this situation, at least, the student was referring to something that someone might have thought was research, right? Even though we all know that it was a bunch of crap. But like I have experiences where students say, oh, in my personal experience, this is reality. And then so it goes to the flip from the population argument to the my personal experience.
But that's, now there we, but there's another strategy, there's another obvious strategy that look, you know, then you need to get to see that personal experience is not what we do in this classroom.
That's what I say.
Right.
So.
You know, and I actually, you know, there's, you know, it's fairly explicit that, you know, unless your personal experience can be, you know, generalized in some legitimate way, it's just your idiosyncratic way of seeing the world. It isn't. So, and that, I mean, and that's true for, you know, this sort of broad claims of, you know, subjectivity, you know, radical subjectivity that students will make about anything. And that's, by the way, another form of, I mean, I don't know if it's incivility, but it raises another set of problems for the classroom about responsibility. You have to make clear that students need, I mean, the notion that students need to present evidence, the sort of, the standard conceptions that we have in the classroom are in fact, in the end, civil conceptions. It's not just, civility isn't just about, as I said, the easy stuff. It is the core thing that holds our classrooms together, because it is the fundamental social contract, to take the language I would use in my class. It's the fundamental social contract that commits you to some sort of rational discussion. I mean, that's what civility is in the end, is a commitment to rational discussion. So it's at the core of our classes. And that's, you know, again, a little bit more on the theory side of the world, but the reason why a kid doesn't read a newspaper is the same reason where at your deepest level they come in committed to rational discussion in the room, because that's what you're there to do. And that's what, you know, we're teaching and learning functions. So that's the, I guess that's a good place to end. I'm out of time, and that seems like a natural ending place anyway.